Hi, this is Abhishek, and I got to interview respected Gita Balakrishnan to know a bit more about the field of architecture. She's the founder of Ethos and ASEDGE, the chairperson of the Indian Institute of Architects West Bengal chapter, and it's also a long story on how I ended up interviewing her. But nonetheless, it has been an absolute honor to interact with her, and I hope you pick up important lessons from this interview.
Share your journey of how you became an architect, how you started off.
Okay, so this goes back very long. You probably weren't even born.
Right.
I studied in Delhi. My class 10th, 11th and 12th were in Delhi, and my uncle is a civil engineer, and that's how I got introduced to this field of architecture. I went through some hard times when I was in my 11th and 12th, and so architecture happened because I took the entrance exam at SPA, and I quite comfortably got in. I was a fairly decent student, so getting through an exam like that wasn't very difficult. Having started architecture, of course, I was completely at a loss because I didn't. Very often, students do have family who's an architect or people like that. And other than this uncle who lived in Chennai, I didn't have anybody, and he was a civil engineer. I didn't have anybody who had a backing. So it was a bit of a struggle to understand what this field was about, but it was very exciting right from the beginning. In fact, 2 months into architecture, I got AIDS, but I did not move out of there because I felt this was something that was giving me immense joy. After graduating, towards the 5th year of architecture in our in the curriculum, you have to do a 6 months to a year of internship with an architect, either in the 5th year or in the 4th year. It depends on which college follows what format. I used to write to this professor in the US every week, probably from my 3rd year, asking him to allow me to come to the US. And this was kind of unheard of in those days,
Yes.
1990. And I kind of pushed so hard that finally he said, go ahead and come here and we'll see what we can do. So the last 6 months of my college life I spent in the US at Pittsburgh. But I was very clear I wanted to come back. He offered me a master's program, but I was very clear I wanted to come back. I came back and tried working with regular architects. It gave me immense dissatisfaction. I was very happy. And I actually responded to an advertisement for a creative educationist in slums. I said, if it's not giving me happiness, let me see what else I can do to let me joy. And they needed an architect. And I applied to that NGO. They needed an architect. And that started my journey of real meeting. And I was with the NGO called ABAS, Association for Voluntary Action and Services, for close to a decade. I'm a trustee on that organization.
Okay.
While I was with ABAS, I was also freelancing as an architect, doing the architecture that I enjoyed, trying to work with materials that were indigenous, which were local, which were environment friendly, which was low cost, trying to help to build within their budget. So that was my initial journey till I moved to Kolkata. This was all in Bangalore. Delhi, from Delhi we moved to Bangalore. After I came back from the US, we moved to Bangalore. Then I moved to Kolkata in 2001, which is when Ethos happened in 2000. And that's a completely different journey altogether. It started with me trying to find my calling in Kolkata.
Okay.
Doing what I was doing in Bangalore wasn't really possible because language was a barrier, working with slums and politics of it, something I wasn't very comfortable with.
Right.
And that's when I thought brand equity was a quiz. But I said, why not? So that's how I launched Arcumen, the first quiz on architecture, which is still the only quiz at its scale in India. And we also took it to Lahore, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, I've done some in Vietnam. So And we found out during my journey with the quiz in the first 2 years, I found a lot of questions coming in from students who were a little lost in their field, trying to, and I remember the feeling from my time when I graduated, when I was in college. So that's how we first happened. And it's grown to be more like an outside the classroom learning platform as well as a support platform, which complements and works with the college education, not really replacing anything, but works with. That's the journey of my life. And
So, ma'am, it has been a long journey. So, what do you think what does architecture have an impact? What kind of an impact does it have on the society, on the time in when you started and now in the modern times?
I think at every point you look at yourself, you're sitting in a room which is probably designed or should be designed by someone.
Right.
Anything that you use should be designed. I mean, if it's designed well is when it performs the best. You talked about sports, the stadium. If it's designed well, it performs well. So I think an architect has a very, very important role. I mean, without even realizing, I think any space that you're in, and you spend about 80% of your time indoors. Most people spend about 80% of their time indoors. It could be an office space, it could be a movie hall, it could be a mall, it could be wherever, And I think that's where the architect's role, I mean, without even realizing, I think you are using these spaces and probably unhappy with some spaces, happy with some experiences in the spaces. And it all boils down to what that architect has done. So I always tell my students that every line that they draw on a piece of paper which leads to a design is probably altering somebody's life. So when you build a building, you're building it for the users, but you also need to look at what you're doing to the outside, what you're doing, to the people around. Is this building serving somebody outside as well? How is it complementing the surrounding context is something that they really need to look at. I don't know if I've answered your question. But
Yes, ma'am. So, according to it, the way an architect designs a place actually has a positive and negative. It may have both positive and negative effect on the person. So it's important.
There is an old saying which says, quoted by Churchill. He says, "We build our buildings and then we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us." So it kind of definitely affects you. Architects can be very powerful. They can actually, and particularly in today's times, you're seeing all this happening with COVID. We're talking about distancing and things like that. There are architects who believe that from now on we design for that. And my concern with that is that you design for that thinking that it's going to be something that's here for good. Then you're probably designing to make sure that people are not going to be going back to the kind of interaction and connections that they had in the past, and that is a dangerous thing. So they have a great power in their hands. And you also talked about from then to now, what is the change? Well, I think first volumes, the technology, the way we built at that time, the way we are building today, the amount of information overload that one has. In those days, we didn't have, if I had to design a building and I need to understand how to go about it, I had to learn the hard way. I had to read books, I had to visit a building that was designed like that, experience it. While today you click a button, you try and look at the 3D views of what is available online, you try and see what is done in different parts of the world. So your mind starts getting conditioned. So originality may be a little impacted in these times if you are not careful. So, and you don't have to be original every time. It's okay to take inspiration. If something is working somewhere, it's okay to see how it works, how it can work here as well. But what I was trying to say was the way you go about design, the way you go about learning in college, everything has changed immensely. I think in all fields, including yours.
So, ma'am, how would you explain or maybe showcase a life of an architect? What is a life of an architect?
It's we are considered to be a different breed. I don't know if your college had an architecture department. I think UAM doesn't, but any engineering college which had an architecture department, they would be called the eccentric lot. ये तो पागल लोग हैं, what we mean. Because we lead a very different life. It's kind of magical. The kind of routine is. I mean, I remember both my brothers being from the engineering stream. They would say the amount I put in terms of work was probably far greater than the engineering stream, because you're thinking on your toes all the time. You're kind of observing, noting down, and you might churn out any number of drawings, but that one eureka moment where something clicks and you feel really good about it is what you're looking forward. It can be magical because you're discovering things every day, like I said. It's very, very tough. Especially the first few years are extremely tough. Pay scales are poor. If you're an employee particularly, if you are doing a project, you can charge from the client, but generally the pay scales are very poor. You look at an engineering starting salary, which will be an architect starting salary. Huge disparity. So you need to have that passion and motivation of wanting to do this for you to sustain. So it is a tough thing. But I think the compensation is in the love for what you're doing. And if you're really passionate about that, you will stick. The first 5-7 years are really tough. After that, you start finding your career.
All right. So, ma'am, you had started your career long back, and at this moment right now there are people starting their career. There are students of yours, I'm sure, and there are many others. So what would be your advice for them to be and excel in this field?
I've always believed in doing what I'm comfortable with, and I think that's very important for each one to be able to do one. I think too is this particular crisis has also taught us how important it is to connect with communities and look beyond yourself and your immediate nucleus. Even as architects, I think it's not just your design, but if, for instance, people on site are not taken care of, the construction workers are not taken care of, your office staff is not taken care of. So I would say that even though they're students, they start looking beyond themselves, reaching out, trying to make a difference. And I strongly advocate every student working for at least a small part of their life, the initial life, even if it's 6 months, trying to make a difference, because that becomes a part of how you think, how you perform as an architect as well, then you become more centered. And I believe that you need to kind of keep introspecting, and I use this quote very often, how it is really important to find out what can help you bridge that what you are and what you can be. And you find what is missing and try and upskill, try and learn on those things.
Okay, so ma'am, in every field, people have to excel and people have to improve. So it takes a lot of practice. What is there other than practice that can make a good architect?
So again, I think observation, reading, a lot of use of your hand, whether it's to write, to record, to sketch, to record, particularly in the field of architecture is extremely important. When you use your hand, it's like reinforcing memories, reinforcing ideas, understanding better. So, carry a little diary, a book, making observations, notes, and actually visit different architects' offices to understand how and why we do certain things.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, thank you for your time. I'm a very busy person, and maybe someday we'll sit for another session.
Sure. Look forward to that. All the best, Abhishek.
Thank you, ma'am.